Hey kids, it's Jurassic James. Interesting Explains. Looking at Pachyrhinosaurus. First, I want to point out, there's a new toy here. Not these guys, not that guy, not the package guy. This thing. This is my new microphone. Everyone say ooh, everyone say ah. My friend Harry always does that. Well, I will say this. You've mentioned it in comments. The audio has the issue. I want to thank first the Woodlands Homeschool because I work a full-time job and I did an event for them and they were like, here's money. And I said, great. And I was able to buy this. I want to thank Mrs. Jurassic James. As you guys, my fans call her Mrs. Jurassic James. I call her Lady Washington, but she is the person who went online and found the right microphone for my camera. And I also want to thank my friend John Danielson, who is a videographer who films me in my job for, all that. But he also just made sure it was working better too. And so all those things work together for this to happen. So finally it's here. Please let me know if you like it, if the audio works in the comments below. That being said, same rules apply, older models and newer models. The animal today, of course, is Pachyrhinosaurus. Pachy means thick, rhino means nose, osaurus means lizard. Saurus is a thick-nosed lizard. This thing on their face is called a boss, which is, to me, the coolest feature on a dinosaur ever. Not that it itself is really cool, calling it a boss, I don't know. So, normally when I talk about dinosaurs, we don't do species, we do genus. You're like, what do you mean? Tyrannosaurus, Stegosaurus, Triceratops, those are all genus or genre names. I normally don't go over species in much detail because it's a lot more to it. I did that my last video with Edmontosaurus because Edmontosaurus regalius has a little fleshy comb here and the other Antitis does not. And so that's why I kind of had to go over that. It's a really big deal about the animals and where they're found. But when I normally go over dinosaurs, I don't do species because, again, it's more detail. But with Pachyrhinosaurus, there's some features here that I have to acknowledge, right? So there are 3 species of Pachyrhinosaurus. The first that was discovered is one called Pachyrhinosaurus canadaensis. If you hear ensis at the end of a name, that means you're from that place. So Velociraptor mongoliensis is from Mongolia. You'll never guess. Pachyrhinosaurus canadaensis is from New Jersey. No, I'm kidding. From Canada. So particularly Alberta. Now, that being said, this one is a canadensis. So it was first uncovered, the first remains were uncovered in 1946, and they weren't described in 1950. And the idea behind that is very simple. We dig the fossil up. Well, we dig out a lot of the fossil. We cover it in plaster and everything. We move it to the museum. Then you prep and work on it. And after so many years, you finally have a fossil out of the matrix. You measure it, write about it, see what you have, and then that is published. That's what happens when they say they're described that year. So 1950, which is the same year my dad was born, actually. And so the idea here is, this is found, we know about this animal, like that, right? There's the next species known is the one right here, and it was described in 2008. And I have my cheat sheet, but I have trouble saying the genus. The species. The species name is spelled Lakustai, which is Lacustia, which is a name after the teacher who found it. So it's a human name, not like a scientific, thing. And so that genus is what you're seeing mainly right here. I'm going to explain why when I get to the actual toys. And so those guys are important because when you notice they all have bosses. Well, this one, my earliest one, which this guy here is a Procon, Procon, made in China. This is my first Pachyrhinosaurus figure. And notice there's horns here and not a boss. The initial interpretation for this genus in general, they found this boss on it, so there must have been some other kind of horn there that may have been ripped off by fossilization. Another example of this idea that was kind of floated for a while was that when you look at a rhinoceros, rhinoceroses, if you don't know, they don't have bony horns. They actually have this kind of like a big rugoose or rough area on their nose, on the skeleton, and then the horn is made of carrots, like our fingernails and hair. It's a protein. And so the idea was maybe they have that. Well, we have found like thousands of bones of these, like 14 individuals of this genus, and so, this species. And so we have found enough of them to know, they all have the boss, and they actually have different ages. So, they were babies at little bosses, and they got bigger and all that. So they're not lost horns. So this one is actually out of, it's no longer accurate or out of date. It's still a cool overall figure by first, you never fit your first dinosaur of any species. Like, it's super exciting. But anyway, so the last species, which I do not have a representative of, as far as I can tell, is one found in Alaska. And the species is Parotium. So Ross Perot, if you know, like Texas, and particularly American history in the last 50, 40 years, he was a big known name in our country's history, and he actually used some of his millions to fund paleontology research. So when you do that, you get a species named after you. Huzzah! Those guys are found in Canada in the Priss Creek Formation, and the idea is that when you watch it's called Walking with Dinosaurs, not the one from the BBC in the 90s, but the one with Pachyrhinosaurus was the main characters, actually. We're going to go over them in a minute, and those are the ones that are in northern Canada, and the irony, of course, is they have features of a different species. But anyway, back to the point. So, first thing to point out with this guy is that basic ceratopsian rules. There are 4 toes. This one has 4 toes. Does it have 4? Yeah, it has 4 toes. And then there's 5 digits. Now there's 5 digits on the hand or the forelimb. 3 of them have claws, and the other 2 are just nubs. So this guy actually shows that very well. Who is this guy? This is Safari 2014. And so this is I think this may be the image I use on my website for Pachyrhinosaurus. So kind of a big deal, kind of an important species. And so again, what I like about it is that in most ceratopsian or horned dinosaurs, their bodies are very similar. It's the heads that are different. So think about like gazelles or impala. They have like the horns maybe a little bit different, but they have like the same kind of body plan for the most part. Also to point out that in general, usually the hips are the highest point or near the highest point of a horned dinosaur. And we've seen in Jurassic World when they're built more like bison, they're more shoulder heavy. But anyway, that's beside the point. In general, with the scales you see here, we now know that horned dinosaurs in general, we believe, the ones we found real skin impressions of, have like these tiny scales, big scale, tiny scale, big scale kind of mix. And this guy, I don't think there's Pachyrhinosaurus skin known, but it has something that we wouldn't be surprised if it has that. I do know there are a few images online of these guys, the ones that are found in Canada, in Alaska, the Priss Creek Formation, of them being woolly, thinking they're that far north, but there is no evidence of that. That is an interpretation. Yes, we know some horned dinosaurs had feather-like quills, but to be that woolly, there's no proof of that. So just know when you see that, it's more of an artistic interpretation, not scientific fact, right? One thing to point out here with this particular one, this is the one from Target. It's Bataan, B-A-T-T-A-T, Terra by Bataan, and in China. The boss, so they have a boss over their nose, and they have 2 over the eye. All the species have that. The size and shape of the boss depends on the species. This one actually looks like the protium. Now, the problem, of course, is the difference between canadensis and Lacustea is that canadensis has these horns right here over on the frill, and the canadensis does not. So even though these are both Jurassic World figures, they are actually different species of Pachyrhinosaurus, whether they knew it or not. I will point out too that the horns up here, these they're actually not technically horns, but these features here are different. Some go up, some go down, depending on species. They don't really look into that as much here. But the main thing to point out is the bigger boss is what we see in the Alaskan species. Here we have, I think it's a Papo. So Papo does not put their name, or at least they don't put the animal's name on the specimen. I think they put Papo on there to say it's our company, but it doesn't tell you what species it is. But it's a Pachyrhinosaurus. Same thing here with the bosses are here. They're often, this one doesn't show, there's no boss over the eye like these guys have. Like this is clearly the 2 little bosses here on the eye. And so, again, it's really interesting that these are all different companies of the same, which should be the same species, very different interpretations over different years. Walking with Dinosaurs, I mentioned that again earlier. This is the one, the main character is called, I think, Patchy. This is him as a figure. And so he has a little hole in his frill, which is an interesting idea because only Triceratops, as far as horned dinosaurs known to science, only Triceratops has a solid frill of bone. All the other ceratopsians who have frills, it's really like a hole here and a hole there in the skeletal structure. And we depict that as being covered in skin. And so I know when I know when this movie came out, kids began asking me, well, do they actually have just a frame of bone, or is it all skin covered? And I was like, that's a good question. But of course, Patchy's is based on an injury in the movie, a character thing. This is his brother. I think his name is Scowler. And so they don't quite have the horn. It's like a little bump there. So I'm technically classify them as not canadensis, but this is the same figure, I think, of him, and has a full horn. It's a smaller figure, same movie character. And so I think this particular toy just made a smaller horn on it. And so One thing about that movie, if you ever watch it, if you haven't seen it before, it was supposed to be a silent film. Silent in that there's no like voiceover. That the dinosaurs were just doing dinosaur things. And I think within a month before it came out, someone decided, not just one person, but some team, executives, whatever, decided to have the voices and characters. And a lot of people don't like that. I don't know if you do or don't. I don't care. But it was one of those things where like having dinosaurs just kind of telling a story without words would have been a kind of interesting thing. But the visuals of that movie are very great. And so people argue the science of things here and there, but the visuals of how the lighting and the animal skin move and all that's really amazing. Now, over here, I want to point out this was actually, I mentioned this in other videos, this was supposed to be a Sinoceratops, which is the only, if I remember correctly, the only horned dinosaur with horns in Asia. And it turns out Sinoceratops, which I did a video on before, they actually, we think, are North American ceratopsians that migrated back across to Asia. And if you don't know, I mentioned before, the horned dinosaurs and the tyrannosaurs who hunted them, originate, we believe, in Asia and migrate across the Bering Strait into North America, and then they start getting bigger and grow all the horns and features, right? But even though the toy was labeled a Sinoceratops, it's actually a Pachyrhinosaurus because it has this big boss and these features. And so, thanks to Camp Cretaceous on Netflix's sequel series, which is, what is it called? I can't remember what it's called. Chaos Theory. They have another Pachyrhinosaurus figure, and I will now use, once again, the official scissors of Jurassic James. And that being said, like a sword being unsheathed, I will, and it's not that hard to cut it out actually. Let's see. And the tail is tucked away in there because you can steal that pretty easily, but it's hard. You don't want a dinosaur with a tail, right? Unless it's Wyrex, the Tyrannosaurus. Let's see. This is really hard to get. Oh, they taped it down. How fun is that? Let's see. This is gonna be great for audio. Like surgery. Okay, I am just going to cheat because in theory I'm a big strong man and use this brute force. How sad would it have been if I couldn't break that on video? Anyway, so take the tail, same as all of our Jurassic World figures. You plug the tail in and you get your okay. I know, you're being born. So, one thing to point out with all of these guys, now, one thing to point out that's really cool is that they all, okay, never mind. So, calm down. So, one thing to point out that's really cool is this guy has 4 toes and 5 fingers. That is awesome. But the problem is the 5 fingers or 5 forelimb digits, they're not correctly displayed. So, what I mean by that is, even this guy has the 3 main clawed toes and the 2 little nubbins. This guy has essentially elephant feet. So they keep doing that in Jurassic World, but he has the right number. This guy has 5 fingers and 5 toes. That is a disgrace and should be shaped. Not the toy. I don't want to yell the toy. The makers. You can easily Google this information. It's not that hard. And I will remind you people, not you people, like the people watching this video, I'll remind the people who make these toys that I am a consultant too. So, I mean, just minor things like the number of toes or fingers or whatever. And so anyway, like all ceratopsians, these guys have beaks, the extra bone called a rostrum in their mouth. And so I often, kids, if you were a plant-eating dinosaur and you were not a sauropod long neck, you had a beak. And the kids say, well, why would I have a beak? Well, the answer is very simple. We as humans have forks and knives to prepare our food before we chew it. The beak for a ceratopsian is its fork and knife, basically, to chomp away at the prey, the plant. Well, they are predators to plants. I mean, if you were a cycad or a fern and you saw a ceratopsian coming, you'd be pretty scared. And it would chomp, and then the teeth would chew it from that point on. Now, I do like this. Okay, so first of all, I mentioned earlier how the early Jurassic World ceratopsians have these high shoulders and low backs like bison. This guy is actually more accurate. His hip is the highest point like that. That is really good. I like that a lot. I did not notice that in the packaging. As far as toy features go, not gonna lie, it was really cool. The way it threw its head back and roared, that felt real. I don't know. That's the only main gimmick. The head goes up and down. if you're probably wondering, there's no way of knowing the noise of the animal because that will require soft tissue preservation. So I would imagine this: a herd of these guys are migrating, and they get caught in a river, and they get buried, and one of them has mud that just like torrents down his throat into his guts, and it just preserves everything, and it survives millions of years, 70 million years particularly, and then it gets preserved in a way that it's there, and then paleontologists who happen to be there at the right time and place are digging to find this thing in a time in which the technology is there to scan it properly and see how this works on the inside. That's how we can probably figure out how they make noises, because we would see this. Or in the future, some brilliant young person probably watching this video will have some new technology to figure it out too. So all our options. The bosses are cool. So I'm going to use the Jurassic whirlwinds for the main point here. So again, essentially, you're seeing two different species, and these are both species found in Alberta, Canada. And so the idea here is that there's more to it than this, but the Canadensis has no horns right here, little unicorn horns, and this guy does. And so that's something that, and again, the other evidence would be they are found in different formations. The horns up here will be different, slightly different orientation, but they will be different species technically. Now, in biology, what makes a species different is that you are unable to breed and have viable offspring. What I mean by that is, if I am married, if we have kids, we are the same species, right? My wife, my child. If a dog and a wolf have a baby or a puppy technically, it's the same. It's the same species technically because it's Canis lupus. Maybe subspecies is different, but a horse and a donkey make a mule, and that is a different species, right? And not only that, the mule cannot breed itself, so that means horses and donkeys are different species. We can never tell that with paleontology because we can't breed Pachyrhinosaurus. We can't use that test. So what we do instead is look at the features of the animal and when and where it lives. And so because they're not in the exact same, I'll mention that in a minute. They're not in the exact same spot, but they're both in Alberta, Canada, in different formations, different rock units. And the way to explain a formation simply, in my opinion, is let's say, you're digging in a dig site. You're in a pit digging up fossils. That is a bed. That is a particular spot. The beds, a number of beds that are all correlated are called a member. A number of members are called a formation. And so when you hear about the Prince Creek Formation or the Horseshoe Canyon Formation, that is a series of regions or an area or region of the same age rock. And maybe you're in this area, there's one exposure to the rock here and exposure here. And there's like a river or something and but they're still the same rock, same age. That's what a formation really is, right? And so with that being said, I'm going to show you one more thing before I get ready for the next video. Because Jurassic James is back, baby. So the Canadensis is living in the, if I remember correctly, Horseshoe Canyon Formation. And so, I believe, yes. And so, in general, who do these guys, let's do it this way. Who do they live with? Who are their contemporaries? So this guy lives with someone called Albertosaurus. One thing to point out, so the importance of this to me, at least, for me, is that in Jurassic World or Park or whatever, all the dinosaurs are contemporaries here in our modern time. But it's really important to me personally, I study these different ecology changes, that when you're in the exact same environment, exact same place, that's really cool. So when you see Albertosaurus, think Edmontosaurus regalius, and actually think, in Horseshoe Canyon, think about a Troceraptor. That they only found that much of it, just the part right there. They found it. And so these guys are living together. Now, another contemporary is a dinosaur called Edmontonia. And of course, you may read that, let's see here, 2004, Safari Pachyrhinosaurus, these guys live in Horseshoe Canyon too. But the formation goes through time. And so these guys lived at the exact same time in the same formation. Pachyrhinosaurus comes after, at a later time. So Pachyrhinosaurus never saw Pachyrhinosaurus. They were in a different layer of rock between these times. So what is that like for you? We all have parents and grandparents or some kind of a parental unit, right? You have great-grandparents that are in your family line, but you never met them. They existed. We know they existed. We have photographs and letters or whatever. These guys were from a different time. The 90s versus the 70s. I don't know. 1990s, 70s, to specify that now. And so another example, in the Prince Creek Formation, one thing to point out with the whether the horn is there or not, we don't, that part of the skeleton, my understanding, has not been found, because they found mainly a skull. And so, let's say, for example, this is our Prince Creek Alaskan Pachyrhinosaurus. It is living in Montosaurus and Troodont, which is a whole thing there. And here's my very special pianist, Albertosaurus. Thank you, my friend Jim. And so initially we thought that it was either Gorgosaurus. That's what you see in the movie. There's now they've looked at the skeleton and said actually so different. It's called a Nukesaurus, which is like essentially the local lingo for like polar bear lizard. And so it essentially would look like an Albertosaurus or Gorgosaurus, but it's a different species. And that's something that happened since the movie came out. So that's a new genus. I have not yet seen an Anuk toy or model. When I find one that is reasonably priced, I will do a video, of course. But until then, I don't know. And finally, in Montonia from Safari, 2010. So these are all Alaskan species. And do know in Alaska, well, not the minus that horn right there, but do know in Alaska, it was still very cold. It was still pretty far up there. So, and it seems based on the bone studies of the dinosaurs that they were not migrating out of the area. So they're living there where half the year there is no light. Now, if you don't know this, even today in parts of Alaska, 6 months of the year there's no sun. There's 6 months of light and 6 months of darkness. And we know that like polar bears and moose can do this apparently, but dinosaurs did it too. And so that's really cool to point out about this species is that this is a northern species from Alberta, Canada, north. You don't really find them in America. That's one thing to point out. But also, Pachyrhinosaurus has had this big fame tour. Everyone loves it. Everyone knows it. And I personally think, is that it's a horned dinosaur, so we know the type, Triceratops, but it doesn't have the big horn. So that stands out, right? There's a lot of dinosaurs that look like other dinosaurs that people don't care about that are super amazing because they look very similar. People are like, how do you tell them apart? Their relative, Styracosaurus, has a big horn on his nose. He's big, kind of, that stands out, right? So that's why it's really famous too, I believe. But Pachyrhinosaurus has that feature, and it's just something unique. I mean, there's other ceratopsians who have boss-like structures, actually. But it has had this world-renowned fame. And what I like about it, too, is that the species in which whose name I cannot pronounce, Lacustea, from Alberta, is that they found a bone bed with 14 individuals and 3,000 plus bones. So there you have, the interpretation of that is that they were probably crossing a river like wildebeest, and some of them just drowned, and the croc relatives didn't get to them, and they went to the bottom of the river and got buried, and now they're a fossil site. So we have lots of individuals to compare their parts to, because many dinosaurs we find, or you may hear about in the news, maybe a few bones here, or Pyroraptor, for example, very few bones. And so here we have a population growth or a population to compare. And that's just really cool, and that's why Pachyrhinosaurus deserves your respect. Now, with that being said, again, tell me in the comments, is the mic working? Are you enjoying this? Are you excited about the future? Now that I have the mic, I can do more videos again. Because I kind of got embarrassed I didn't do enough videos with a good enough mic. Now it's a bigger and better mic. So let me know, please, because a lot went into that. And I really appreciate you for tuning in. And if you're still here, my goodness, thank you for being a nerd. Nerd's a good thing, trust me. In closing, I'll tell you, at work, I call people nerds all the time. And they're like, oh, how offended. I'm like, yeah, look at me. Who am I? Look at all this stuff in the ball. Anyway, that being said, I'll see you guys later. Thank you for tuning in, and I appreciate you greatly.